So into this texter question, it's from the 614. A couple years ago, you, Stephen, and Nathan predicted the Ohio State 2023 team would win the national championship and that it might be the greatest college football team ever assembled. Do you still feel that way? If not, why not? What has happened to change your mind? What makes you think those things could still come to pass? So we have brushed on this idea since we first put it out there on the heels of the Quinn Ewers commitment to Ohio State. And at that time, we thought they were adding Quinn Ewers to what was a very, very good 2021 recruiting class. And most of the time when we do predictions like this, you're putting it on the shoulders of the third-year guys, because the third-year guys are the ones who have to be here. You cannot rest expectations on fourth-year guys in college football, because the fourth-year guys for Ohio State this year are Paris Johnson, C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Luke Whippler, and none of them are here. So you have to rest it on the third-year guys. So let's start with those third-year guys. The way I think of it, Nathan, and I think we thought of this when we talked about it, you're thinking about how good the third-year players can be. You're basing it off that recruiting class. So we're talking about the 2021 recruiting class, and then you're theorizing ahead of time, well, where else might they get supplemented in a meaningful way by fourth-year guys who are still here? And where might they get supplemented in a meaningful way by second-year guys who are ready to go? But it is mostly a third-year discussion. So when the texter says, why did we think that? And why do we still think it or not think it? Is that fair to say that's where a lot of our energy is?
Yes, exactly. And it was, well, yeah, because Quinn Ewers got reclassified to 2021. Whether you want to count him as a true third-year player or not is a little bit of a quibble, because he wasn't really doing much that first year. But yeah, that was all what it was. It was projecting ahead to stars, and then maybe you have one holdover here, one guy ahead of schedule here. But the number of stars, I mean, the fact that they had, even if you take out Quinn Ewers, which he did take himself out of the equation, you would still have six top 30 players in that class, including another quarterback and multiple defensive ends. Like you had, it was not only third year players, but a lot of third year players apparently at really key positions.
And I guess even at that time, right, when we were talking about it, it was Quinn Ewers we thought would have been in the class of 2022. So here's going to be this second-year quarterback who, as a second-year guy, will be ready to take over for C.J. Stroud and then lead this group of third-year guys, Stephen. So as it turned out, he actually was in that class. But the bottom line was, it felt like in the moment, Stephen, we were putting a quarterback, the highest-rated quarterback ever, as a cherry on top of what we felt would be a foundational group of third-year guys, which led us to that discussion.
Which is why, for me, I don't know if we have to back off of that yet, because the things that we thought would be awesome, there's a chance they're going to be awesome this year, and the things that we thought might be problems are problems. We said then we have been talking about the tackle problem for 2 years. And now there's a tackle problem. It might get solved this fall, but we thought the wide receivers would be awesome. Their wide receivers from, if you just like take the names away and just point them out there, it's the son of a Hall of Famer who might be the best wide receiver in the country, and two guys who were the former number one wide receiver in their recruiting class. That's their starting receiving core. Their tight end is a now third year playing tight end who might be one of the better tight ends in the Big Ten. Maybe if you did like a top 15 tight ends in the country, maybe Cade Stover slides into that list, but he's pretty quality. He showed some things last year. This is a deep running back room led by the number one running back in the country. Their guards are two former top 100 recruits, one of which was a 5-star. Now they have to figure some things out at center because Luke Whippler left and we weren't expecting that. But then on defense, it's two former 5-star top 5 recruits in the country as your starting edge rushers, an interior with some high upside, even if we feel like the depth needs to be developed a little bit, and some quality cornerbacks and some decent linebackers. But we thought though, when we did it, we thought the problem would be tackle, and the problem is tackle. Everything else, for the most part, has worked out the way we thought it worked out. Even quarterback to an extent, even without Quinn Ewers, there's a potentially that it's still going to be a first-time starting quarterback, and he might be a 5-star.
So let's go through that class and decide, okay, this 2021 class, what we thought back then when we said it and what we think now. Do we think the same? Have we lowered our expectations around certain players and certain position groups, or have we raised our expectations around certain players and position groups? And this is not to call anybody out, but this is it's our perception.
Calling
What
us
would,
out.
what would make us say such a thing? And listen, it's not ratings. It's not like I believed it. Like we were not, yeah, you guys want to throw out, like, I don't know. What should we do this week? We could throw out greatest team ever. What do you think? Or do rapid fire. What do you think? You know what? Let's just throw out greatest team ever. See what happens. What is the point of that? It's like, what should we do? You want to throw out 9-3? We could throw out 9-3. Yeah, that feels like that'll get us through a day. It sticks to you, man. You can't just throw stuff out there in the world. So there was no part of this that we didn't believe in the moment, the possibility of it. But let's start with quarterback. And the reality of it is, Quinn Ewers, it was like setting the world on fire, man. They got the number one quarterback, highest rated guy ever out of Texas, decommits from his dream school, comes to Ohio State. Holy moly, he's going to be the next guy in line. We talk about the evolution of the position. Okay, well, if you thought Dwayne Haskins was good, and then Justin Fields, and then CJ Stroud, wait till they get Quinn Ewers as the best quarterback recruit ever, Nathan. But instead, what do we have? A guy that Quinn Ewers, again, reclassifying into the class of 2021, is the number one player, number one quarterback. So who do they have instead? Kyle McCord, who was the number 28 player, number 6 quarterback. So I don't know, Nathan. Has our perception of the quarterback position, how is it different from when we said that way back then? Of course, knowing that Quinn Ewers is not here.
It's definitely lowered, and it's not anything Kyle McCord has or hasn't done, because I think our expectations of Kyle McCord have stayed pretty consistent through this whole thing. But when we were talking about Quinn Ewers, it was all about that recruiting ranking and that potential, that idea that you're just dropping this unicorn on top of an already, as you said, an already kind of mythically talented group. That's pushing a little far, but not so much the unicorn thing, because at the time, you're just projecting out, well, the other guys who have been like a perfectly rated recruit, or almost, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, like, it looks pretty magic. So if you've already got this collection of talent and now you're adding him to that you're right. It just seemed like an accelerator a little bit to kind of push this thing up into that thing where now you're talking about, can this team challenge for the super team status that Ohio State has sort of been chasing now for several years, while watching other teams put together their version of it.
Let me ask you this. Quinn Ewers, as it turned out, was the number one quarterback recruit in the class of 2021 after he reclassified. Number 2 was Caleb Williams. Mm-hmm. Steven, if Caleb Williams was Ohio State's starting quarterback right now, would anybody be asking about the super team thing, or would people be printing up Buckeye Talk predicted it? 2023 Ohio State, the greatest college football team of all time. Because listen, did we think that Quinn Ewers was going to win the Heisman as a sophomore or as a first-year guy, whatever, right? Did we think that in 2023, hey, we're predicting Ohio State's going to be this good? Why? Because we think Quinn Ewers is going to be the reigning Heisman winner and back as a second-year starter. No, that's not what we were saying. But, Steven, that level of quarterback play, what we were maybe anticipating, it's that. Now, of course, Quinn Ewers and Kyle McCord and Caleb Williams are all different styles of quarterback. But that certainly was in my head, Steven. And I know it is not a straight line from recruit to development to success on the field. But it worked for the number 2 quarterback in this class in 2021, who was the number 1 quarterback until Quinn Ewers reclassified. Caleb Williams lived up to the hype. There was an anticipation from us of Quinn Ewers living up to the hype. So let's dance on that dance floor, Steven. What if Caleb Williams was this Ohio State quarterback right now? What would we be saying?
Yeah, I hate the reclassification thing because it throws everything off here, because it's like Caleb Williams was the number 1 quarterback in the country when we were having this conversation. It changes everything. I don't think any of us would be worried. We'd be like, super team. And you threw out the style of quarterback thing. I'm not going to throw it out, because that matters when we've been predicting that there was going to be a tackle problem. What if they had a tackle problem, but their quarterback had the playmaking ability of a guy like Caleb Williams? It's like, okay, you still need to protect him, but that dude is going to make, for every 10 rushers who get through, he's going to make 7 of them miss. And then he's going to do something stupid with the ball that's going to have all of our jaws on the floor. That matters to me, especially with this receiving core. So it wouldn't even be a conversation right now. We probably wouldn't even be answering this question. It would just be guys texting us like, guys, you were right. They have a super team now. I think what also matters is the minute you step on the field, the star rating shininess starts to come off of you. And we've gotten to see, even if it was 2 years ago, we've seen Kyle McCord play football. Even if it was Akron, we've seen him start a game. We've seen Quinn Ewers play football. And so far, Kyle McCord, in the small amount we've gotten to see him, hasn't looked like the dude who was a 5-star recruit. Let's just be real about it. So far, in the football we've gotten to see from Quinn Ewers, that doesn't look like a perfectly rated quarterback. Whether it's fair to them or not, that's the truth. We have seen Caleb Williams come in from the moment he replaced Spencer Rattler in that Oklahoma game, look like a dude who was a 5-star quarterback, number 1 quarterback in his class, all of those things. And so he got to keep his shininess. So when that's part of the equation here, that has to matter when you're talking about, has the expectation lowered, higher, or stayed the same? If Caleb Williams was the quarterback we were building this around, we'd probably be higher because he's already maximized and lived up to that hype, and even more so, while the other two haven't done so yet.
So this is not against Kyle McCord because, Nathan, if Quinn Ewers was here right now playing the way he played at Texas last year, our expectations would have lowered as well, which is kind of what Steven just said, right? Well, you went from the most perfectly rated quarterback ever to good, but not perfect anymore. But also, again, the expectation when we did this was not that Quinn Ewers would have played in 2022. But if we were sitting here in a situation where Alabama in 2021, they win the national championship with Mac Jones at quarterback in 2020. And now it's Bryce time. It's time for Bryce Young. And you didn't know for sure, but that was the number 1 quarterback in that class. And I think you had a pretty good idea. Now, you also thought you had a pretty good idea with DJ Uiagalelei, and that turned out not to be true. But Bryce, I think, maybe is the better example here, Nathan, where if we were sitting here right now, the way Alabama was sitting there in 2021, with, okay, well, Bryce Young's never played, but man, there's no reason not to think this guy's going to be spectacular. If we were getting ready for that version of Quinn Ewers, because maybe Caleb does not fit here, because CJ Stroud was going to be the quarterback last year no matter what. If we were getting ready for that, I think we'd be in a different place right now, because people would just be like, oh my, like, can't this guy, get this guy on the field. Like, and we're not quite there yet. Like, we're not quite there. Kyle McCord did not slam the door. Like, he was good. I think he was fine. And I will say, we have other quarterback questions that we will get even deeper into this. There's, I think, some confusion in the Ohio State fan base about the quarterback situation right now. I think people like us are contributing to that in some degree because two things. One is Devin Brown exists, so it's not an all or nothing. It's not Kyle McCord do or die. There's another good option. And then our perception as people who were not at all 15 practices, but who were at some, isn't that, wow, Kyle McCord's going to be the number 1 pick of the draft next year. That's just not our perception. And it might be wrong, Nathan. But in the end, I think the Caleb Williams version for Ohio State, yeah, of course. If he was a quarterback, oh my gosh. But also the Bryce Young version of he hasn't played yet, but there is every expectation that he's going to be spectacular. We're not quite there at either of those. So we're below expectation at quarterback, but we also might be wrong because the quarterback play may absolutely live up or come close to living up to the expectations that we set when we said this 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I would just encourage people to remember that the expectation that people had for Ohio State quarterback play in the spring of 2019 was lower than what Justin Fields, I think, turned out to be that first year as a Heisman Trophy finalist. He had grown some moles, or however you want to say it, over the course of that spring. It wasn't a super sharp spring game, and there were some other things. And the expectation of quarterback play that Ohio State would have in 2021 was less, had dipped a little bit 3 or 4 games into that season, because we were having conversations about, well, maybe they need to take a look at this Common Core guy. I don't know about CJ Stroud, and then Laser Show, and he took care of things. And so that's going to bounce a little bit. Like, I think Steven makes a good point that about the shine of the 5-star, and it's hard to keep that shine because when you haven't been exposed to anything, you haven't had to go up against a pass rush, you haven't had to read a defense, you're still just all potential, and you're going to lose some of that. And then then you can try to buff yourself back to that shine. And I think like CJ Stroud did that. So I would push back a little bit though, like as far as, Caleb Williams last year didn't make USC a super team. So I'm really curious. We need to finish the rest of this conversation and see if all of those other categories that we thought were going to make this a super team, how many of those have we lowered our expectation on? I totally understand what you guys are saying. And if Caleb Williams were here at Ohio State, the level of expectation, we would be talking about this team differently, 1,000%. But I am curious how the rest of this conversation is going to go.
I do think, though, I actually think the DJ comparison is perfect here because Kyle is in a similar position, not same competition, but similar position where we got to at least see it as a true freshman. And DJ's first 2 games as a college football player where he got extended minutes, it was like, oh, okay, he's going to be awesome when he finally takes over for Trevor Lawrence. And then it didn't correlate. But so could we see that, but the opposite of that, where the first time we saw Kyle as a 5-star, it was like, all right, it's good, but that's not replacing CJ Stroud. To now that he's had 2 years under his belt here, it almost makes us forget about the dude that we saw against Akron. While with DJ, the rest of his career was like, where's the guy who showed up against Notre Dame? Because we haven't seen that guy since then. So I almost think that's a better comparison because we got a sprinkle of DJ and thought that we kind of marked it off as, yep, he's going to be awesome because we've already seen it, and then it just didn't live up to it the second time around.
If Caleb Williams was Ohio State's quarterback right now, I think Ohio State would be, if not a unanimous, an overwhelming preseason number 1 team. I think if the vibes around the Ohio State quarterback position were like Bryce Young vibes of like, okay, he's never played, but come on, I mean, it's going to be Bryce Young. I think they would be in the mix to be the number 1 preseason team in the country. And as it is, I don't think they're a top 5 team, no doubt about it. But I don't think they're at the Georgia, maybe Michigan level right now. And because just there's a scooch bit of, I don't even know if uncertainty is the right word, just a lack of assuredness at the quarterback position. It's not doubt, and we'll save it for another pod. It's not doubt. It's just not 1,000% locked in coming out of spring, which then makes you say, okay. But if you had Caleb Williams throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr., it'd be like, I don't know, would they be a wild card team in the NFL? What are we talking about here? So that's maybe, right? We thought there was a possible version of that. So quarterback is, at this moment, somewhat significantly under our perception of what it could be when we said this 2 years ago. So let's lay that groundwork here. Doesn't mean it's not going to be good quarterback play. Quick break. When we come back, we'll go to the defensive ends next on Buckeye Talk. I think this is one pod. It's 18 minutes on one position.
This like one pod. And the other questions can be that the missing one that we were going to do later this week.
Yeah. So I think we're in good shape. Yeah. Okay. All right, back on Buckeye Talk. Let's go to the guys who were the next highest rated players in that class once Quinn Ewers reclassified. So Quinn Ewers reclassifies in 2021. He's number 1. And then we get to JT Tuimoloau is in the 247 composite, the number 4 overall player. And Jack Sawyer is the number 5 overall player. And I just feel like we end up talking about it a lot. Let's, whatever you say in court, like we'll acknowledge the JT Penn State game. It was great. We know that. State for the record, it was great. JT and Jack, Steven, just what we were saying, what we thought the defensive ends, given their ranking, might be in year 3 compared to where we are now. Do you think we're the same? Are they a little less than what we thought? Are they a little more than what we thought?
I think we're less, and I don't think it's completely their fault. I think JT is on schedule to do what we think he should be as his third year guy. It's like, all right, we saw the flat. We saw he played a little bit he was ahead of schedule as a freshman because he got here mid-July and was playing and he shouldn't have been playing. And then last year we saw the flashes. So it's almost like he got ahead of schedule and then he slowed down a little bit. So now he's right on schedule. They did something weird with Jack as a sophomore and it didn't work. And I feel like we're going to find out this year whether that screwed up his development as a dude who he was a 5-star top 10 player in the country because he gets after the quarterback. His nickname in high school was Baby Bosa. So it's like, they're behind. It's lesser because we haven't seen it yet, but it could very easily be exactly what we thought it was going to be if it feels like finally they let Jack do what he came here to do, and he's awesome, and JT is right on schedule, and he's awesome as well. There is a world where both of these guys are out of here as 3-and-done players.
So, Nathan, I do think at the time we thought 2023 had a chance to show us something that we'd never seen at Ohio State before, other than for 2.5 games in 2018 with Nick Bosa and Chase Young, before Nick Bosa had the season-ending injury. And we knew what it looked like to have Joey Bosa. We knew what it looked like to have Nick Bosa. We knew what it looked like to have Chase Young. We didn't know what it looked like to have two of those three healthy all season at the same time. And we also were anticipating, I think, that's a level above Sam Hubbard, Tyquan Lewis, Jalen Holmes, Zach Harrison, everybody else who's a very good defensive end, right? We thought, hey, they're two of the top 5 players in the country, Nathan. I don't think we think that right now. Is that right, Nathan? That's not where we are thinking. I don't even know how opposing offenses are going to be able to snap the ball because JT and Jack are just going to be doing rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to rip the quarterback's arms off on this play.
Yeah, I think we're even more under what our expectations were than Steven does, because I think at this point, even if you're not going by that fictional, as it turned out, Bosa Young standard, that combo, I think we thought by now one of these two guys, either one of them, would be individually on that path to the kind of presence that those predecessors had. Because, I mean, Chase Young, 10 sacks as a sophomore, I think. Obviously, the Bosas hit big early in their careers. By year 2, you had an idea. I'm going to keep using this term. You had an idea that maybe there was a unicorn in your presence. You had an idea that this guy might just be a dragon and there's nothing anybody can do. And that next year, it's going to look that third year, it's going to look a little unfair when those guys are playing a lot of games. There's going to be a lot of teams where it looks like, why are they letting that NFL guy play against this poor little team? And I think JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are both poised for really good years, but nobody's talking about them like that right now, with the exception of JT Tuimoloau flashing what he did against Penn State. But that's still more of a flash than anything he's done consistently in his career. And he's not going to do that consistently, but we're all talking about the same thing here. I think it's definitely, I thought that by now we would maybe be talking about one of those two guys as somebody who has taken that kind of hyper step into something really special, as opposed to us talking about, because like just to say that maybe they'll both be NFL draft picks after their third year is not a really, really high bar. Those are both, I mean, guys who were ranked so high at a position of great interest like that itself is not that's not the target we were thinking of when we were talking about maybe this is the greatest team of all time. When we were making that kind of analysis, we thought one of these two guys would already be Younging or Bosa-ing or about to be a third year version of that. And that just hasn't happened yet.
We thought there was a chance that Ohio State in 2023 would have the best quarterback play it's ever seen and the best defensive end pairing it's ever seen. That's what we were thinking. When we say those things, that's what we thought was on the table. And right now, we're not thinking either of those things. But maybe they'll get there. But I do think our perception, again, I agree, we are under in May of 2023 where we were 2 years ago. because it has. And maybe the point of this is when you say something like what we said about players who have never played college football, when you set the goal at greatest team of all time, and then we're like, I think we're a little under. It's like, oh, you think? Because what's over? You think they could win the Super Bowl this year? Like, how could we be over, Steven? Of course we're under. We're not sure they're going to be better than they were last year. So but we are pretty certain they're a top 5 team, but top 5 team is somewhat significantly under the greatest football team of all time. So that's where we are. But again, if you were saying that 2023, we were getting year 3 Joey Bosa after what he did in year 2 when he was an All-American for the national champions, and year 3 Chase Young when he had 10 sacks on 2 bad ankles in 2018, if that's what we were talking about right now, Joel Klatt would just be living in Columbus doing nothing. Gus Johnson, ESPN would have set up camp here, Stephen, because we would be expecting an unprecedented pass rush in college football history. And I don't think anybody is thinking about Jack and JT right now the way they were thinking about either Bosa or Chase Young coming into year 3. And that's okay. But we're under. We are. I think we're maybe a little bit significantly under.
I think the problem is Larry's had obviously some his generational guys here, but they've been generational guys from the moment they walked here. And it was just like, hey, Larry, are you going to let them be generational or not? Like Chase probably could have had like 5 sacks as a freshman if they would have played him, but like they didn't play him because they didn't have to play him. He didn't play a single snap in that 2017 Penn State game. Nick Bosa, his stats are probably deserve an asterisk by him because he never just got to be the guy who goes out there and plays 50 plus snaps because he was in those rotations. And it's like, hey, Nick probably shouldn't be coming off the field. And Joey played less and less every year because of the Larry Johnson philosophy, but also they quadruple teamed him in 2015, so his numbers fell off a cliff. We have seen at cornerback, we've seen at quarterback, we've seen at wide receiver, we've seen all these other positions where, like, for some reason, it just clicks in year 3. And there's no explanation. Sometimes the explanation is I was hurt the first 2 years, but usually there's no like realistic explanation. It's just like it pops and it finally clicks for them in year 3. We haven't seen that yet at defensive end. And so that's what we'd be asking from Jack and JT is like, hey, you've been pretty decent in your career here, but now we need you to be a unicorn. And we don't have an explanation for how you're going to make the jump, but just make the jump. And so that's why you have to be under, because so far we haven't even, with those guys, Chase was a unicorn in year 2. He just was hurt. Nick Bosa was a unicorn literally the moment he came here, which is already crazy because he came here on a torn ACL. And Joey Bosa was literally a unicorn from the moment he stepped on the field. So it goes back to when we do the Buckeye Retalkables, the entire, if he's going to bite, he bites as a pup. Well, those guys were full-grown pool dogs by the time they got here, while Jack and JT and even also Zach Harrison, they were actually pups when they got here, so they've had more gradual development. And so maybe they get the unicorn status, maybe they don't.
Okay, so we're under. We're under at defensive end, which is fine. Receiver. So what we were looking at when we were projecting 2023 at receiver is the greatest collection of receiving talent in college football history, because what we're talking about, right? We are at that moment. You think you're taking a fourth-year class, guys who could be fourth-year guys right now, which is Julian Fleming, Jackson Smith-Njigba, G. Scott, Mookie Cooper at receiver, and you're adding to them third-year guys in Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Jaden Ballard. And somewhere in there, from those 7 guys, you are going to get a collection that creates the greatest receiver room in Ohio State football history. So we all know, G. Scott Jr. is a tight end. Mookie Cooper is at Missouri. Julian Fleming is right here, and he's starting. And that's pretty darn good. Jackson's gone, but that's not a shock that one of those guys is to the NFL. And Emeka was the number 1 receiver, the number, I believe, 10 overall player in the rankings from 247 Sports, and Marv was the number 97 overall player. So Marv has become Marv, and Emeka is really darn good. Nathan, We thought it had a chance to be the best collection of Ohio State receiver talent ever. Are we still there? Are they higher than we thought, lower than we thought, or kind of right on what we said 2 years ago?
I think as far as the starting group, I think it's above. I think it's ahead. And it's because instead of what you're kind of describing, which is, well, out of all those bodies, probably 3 really good guys will emerge, and maybe there's a fourth in the mix. Instead of that, you've got a returning unanimous All-American. And at the time, we probably thought maybe Ibuka would be the best and Marvin Harrison would have a good year, but that's flipped. So instead, you've got Harrison as a returning unanimous All-American. You've got Ibuka, who had, in some respects, an All-American season. And as we've talked about before, it's just overshadowed. And then you've got Fleming as a really productive third guy who it always seems like has that promise of more if the next surgery just fixes him and gets him through a full season healthy. I would say that this is better. They have to have the 3 guys locked in the way that they do, and the certainty that you have right now. And then also, I think the way that now that we've seen what Marvin is too, because he didn't have an opportunity to play that much as a freshman until the very end, but he, I think, checks that unicorn box, right? Like, obviously at this point, to be what he was in his second year, I think does that. So now that you've seen just what he individually can be, which in tandem with the quarterbacks, even though they're down, so I think maybe is the passing game as a whole still more or less on track, even if the quarterback is down and the receivers are up?
I do think, Steven, sort of what we were talking about at defensive end, Marv and Emeka as receivers are maybe what we thought JT and Jack would be as defensive ends right now. Nathan, you were saying that, like, hey, one guy is like, oh my God, he's the best defensive end in the country, and the other guy is really good. And we have that at receiver, Steven. So you're kind of nodding. You think Nathan says we're kind of above what we thought. Do you think we're above?
I think so. One, because everybody's on schedule. That's the first part of this. Emeka Ibuka, if you just go look at those 2020 wide receiver groups, Emeka's the only one who's completely lived up to what his recruiting ranking is. Marvin has obviously surpassed that and by tenfold, but he was the number 1 wide receiver in his class, and he might arguably be the best receiver not named Marvin Harrison Jr. in college football as now a third-year dude. Julian Fleming, for what the context is, for why he is the highest-rated receiver Ohio State's ever had until Jeremiah Smith gets here, is the physical of what Nathan just said. There's always feels like there's more to tap into there, but there was always going to be his development plan was always going to look more like Jaden Ballard's, where it was going to take a while. But if you'd ask Brian Hartline of the 4 from that 2020 group, if you told him who are the 2 most likely to make an impact, he'd probably say Jackson first because Jackson's a 5-star from Texas and ended up being what 5-stars from Texas typically are, and then Julian Fleming once it clicks. Fleming is healthy and it's starting to click, and he was very productive last season, especially once he got healthy. Even in that Georgia game, he had like 70 receiving yards, so he had a really quality day there. But the concept of the number 1 receiver in the 21 recruiting class has lived up to being the number 1 receiver in the 21 recruiting class. And then the other dude who was like clearly underrated in that class is the son of a Hall of Famer who's like a freak unicorn, all those, you know, imaginary creatures you want to name. That puts you above, because when we did it, we thought 2 of these guys would be dudes and you'd have a really quality dude. We just probably picked the wrong 2 dudes to be the dudes and the other guy to be quality. We probably would have said Marvin would be quality while Julian and Emeka, just based off recruiting rankings, would be the dudes.
Yeah, Marvin's not on schedule. Marvin had like a train schedule he was following, and then he traded it in for the Concord schedule. Like he changed schedules.
Yeah.
I do think one of the other things that happened is the context maybe of what a best. I'm trying to think when we did this podcast. Like, I'm looking back again. I want to know exactly when we did it, because I'm trying to figure out when the context changed.
I think we did it in about late July, like right before we went to Big Ten Media Days, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. That sounds about right. I'm going to find it.
I have a 2023
July 7,
depth chart.
2021. July 7.
Because it was right after after JT committed, because we were waiting on that
Yep.
to see if they would get him before we did it.
The 2023 Buckeyes look headed for a national title. Okay, July 2021. Then the 2021 receiver room shows up, and it's that Chris Olave stays maybe when we didn't expect him to. And then, well, it's like, oh, now they have Chris and Garrett together. And then Jackson has the biggest receiving season in Big Ten history after starting the year as a third guy. So then that context, Nathan, if in July of 2021, we were like, I think this 2023 receiver room might be the greatest collection of Ohio State receivers ever. And then Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Jackson Smith and Jigba went out. It was like, okay, well, can you be better than that? So that context changed a little bit. But I don't think we're sitting here in May of 2023 saying like, well, Chris, Garrett, Jackson, they could never do that again. That's on the table for right now. But I do think we also now have already seen that version of it already. It's can they sort of do that again? Because at that point, if you said, oh, you're going to have 3 first-round guys who are all on the field together. And by the way, if Jackson hadn't gotten hurt, he would have been a top 15, borderline top 10 guy, just like Garrett and Chris were. So that's a high bar, Nathan. That bar didn't exist when we did the pod. So I don't think our standards, I don't think this receiver group is under anything we would have said back then. I do think the bar has been raised, though, by what those 3 receivers did in 2021 after we did that first pod.
And again, I'm looking at the 2 deep that I put together for that pod or around that discussion, and it had Caleb Burton as the backup slot as the backup X, and Caleb Brown as the backup slot. And as we've already seen, to kind of go to your point about the greatest collection of receiving talent, like both those guys kind of got squeezed out already by this other group that's coming in behind him. And so now, as far as if you're starting to just envision the full top end talent of the room, I think that has probably changed, and maybe we undershot that a little bit. This might be better than we were thinking, just in terms of the overall talent that be in this room right now.
I think Fleming will decide which of the last 3 rooms is the best, because you just said it, the 21 room, 2 first-rounders and a guy who was the first receiver taken off the board in his respective draft class. And Garrett and Chris were second and third. Marvin's going to be the first wide receiver taken. He might be the first non-quarterback taken, and depending on who has the first pick, he might be the first player taken. Emeka might be number 2 next spring. Is Julian a first-round pick? Which is going to be a conversation of, can he stay healthy enough with some of these soft tissue stuff to get through a year? And then, Hart might thinks he's got first-round talent. That doesn't, just because you're a first-round talent doesn't make you a first-round pick, though, because that's a lot of different things. If, Julian Fleming stays healthy this year, and let's say he has, 900 yards, right? Let's just say he has the same exact stat line that Chris Olave had. And then he goes to the combine for a dude who's 6'2", 205 pounds, and he's running a low 4.4 or a high 4.3, and he's lighting it up in draft prep, and somehow he sneaks into 27, then we can have that conversation. But when you're talking about rooms where 21 had 3 first-rounders, 2022 would have had 3 first-rounders had Jackson not gotten hurt, when you're talking about who the top 3 ended up being, 2022's got to match that to be in that conversation.
And that's a little bit results based, but What happened in 2021 was there were 2 established dudes, and then the third guy came in and was like, oh, you can't cover him.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, are we watching this season being like, well, Marv's Marv and Emeka's Emeka, but also, by the way, you can't cover Julian Fleming. If you single him up on the outside, you're giving up a 50-yard touchdown pass every single time. He'll kill you. Mm-hmm. Because that's what the point Jackson got to, that, you're going to try to cover Chris and Garrett on the outside. All right, then Jackson is just going to destroy you in the middle of the field. Good luck with that. So I think we'll feel it. The NFL will reflect or not reflect they will reflect what we are feeling and seeing as it happens, which is, healthy Julian Fleming has risen to the point of borderline uncoverable. Let's go to running back. I'm telling you, this is why we were where we were. This is why we were where we were. Trayvon Henderson's the number 1 running back in that class. 247 Sports Composite. He's number 1. Evan Pryor's number 6. That's the number 23 and the number 83 overall players, 2383, overall running backs 1-6, Stephen. What if right now we were thinking about the Ohio State running back room the way people are thinking about the Michigan running back room right now? Because, by the way, Donovan Edwards, who's one of the guys in the Michigan running back room, was 4th in that class, and then Blake Corum's around still. So what are we thinking about Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards? I don't know. They're going to destroy everybody. I think, Stephen, when we thought about third-year Travion Henderson and third-year Evan Pryor, that's kind of where we were in July 2021, were we not?
Yeah, and we're definitely under, because now, regardless of who you want to put Travion with, at best, Ohio State's the third best running back tandem in the Big Ten, because Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are pretty freaking good too, and they kind of ran all over Ohio State for a little bit there. This was hard.
I think you'd probably throw in Braylon Allen and Chaz Malucci at Wisconsin.
Yeah, you might throw that. Yeah, so maybe it's
you know the Big Ten.
Yeah, this is a really good year for the Big Ten with running back tandems. Usually, you just see like running back. The fact that there's so many tandems is kudos to the Big Ten there. This is the hardest one. Travion Henderson had 1,500 yards as a true freshman. He's 1,500 yards. Like, let's just flip these years. What if Travion Henderson had all these like injury problems as a freshman? It's JK. Like, what if the second year was just the first year? It's like, oh, he was hurt. And then he finally got hurt. And it's like, oh, there's the number one running back in the country. We'd be like, oh, Travion Henderson's a Doak Walker Award finalist probably this year. He's out of here, baby. And Evan Pryor, who we just have not seen at all. Maybe he's a solid number 2, or Mayan Williams being what he is a solid number 2 at this point. But if you just flip those first 2 years for Travion, it's a different narrative around him. So it's like hard to talk about him, because it's like, I don't know. Travion Henderson's a decent back, but we don't know if he can carry the load. The dude had 1,500 yards as a freshman. So why can't he J.K. Dobbins it this year? But also, why would you think he would J.K. Dobbins it this year?
It's hard, but Nathan, at least we're spelling out the possibilities that we envisioned. And I think it's valuable. Like, we're seeing sort of other teams do it, not one single team, right? We're thinking, well, what if we thought Ohio State was going to have Georgia's defense, Michigan's run game, the 2021 Ohio State receiver room, and USC's quarterback? We thought that was all going to be on Ohio State's team. That's where we were. But when you look at it, Nathan, and you look at Ezekiel Elliott, and when you look at J.K. Dobbins, and when you look at the possibility of what great backs look like at Ohio State, and then you see, oh, we are talking about a recruiting class that has the number 1 and number 6 running backs in the class. I think it was reasonable to have great expectations for them. But again, then, not surprisingly, it is hard to live up to those, especially when you are hurt. And Evan Pryor lost all of last season to injury, and Travion Henderson lost all of being himself last year to injury, Nathan. So, of course, they have to be under right now. But it is not a bad reminder of what they once were, because I don't think there's definitive proof that they can't be that if they're healthy. And by the way, we now have Mayan Williams in that mix and Dallin Hayden in that mix as guys who can help.
But the other thing to remember too is not to confuse being productive with being special, because the conversation was all about having guys at so many different positions that look like they're going to be something really special. And even that freshman year for Travion Henderson, as we've talked before, getting like 20% of those yards in just the Tulsa game. It wasn't like he was running roughshod over college football yet. It was a good start. So I agree with some of what Stephen was saying, but ultimately, yeah, it's definitely under where we thought it would be, even if you swap in Mayan Williams for Evan Pryor. And I think right now, Travion Henderson is such an interesting player, because he clearly would probably hear conversations like this, and I think hears them in a greater sense, a broader sense, that there is maybe doubt out there about just what his ceiling is as a college football player and a college running back. Because right now, in theory, if you're top 25 in your class, you should be one of the top 100 players in college football, or at least top 75 after your third year. And I don't think anybody would rank him there right now. And that's something for him. That's something to go in and improve this year.
But at the same time, once again, this is what makes him hard. We knew he was special the first time he touched the ball for Ohio State against Minnesota. And it was like the smallest possible sample size, but his first carry goes for 10 yards, and it's like, oh, I probably could have gone for more. His second carry is pretty decent, and then 70-yard screen pass. He showed flashes of special. It's just the Tulsa game is so loud that you maybe have to calm yourself down off of that hill. But he was pretty good in the Penn State game as well. But the bigger point I want to make here with him is we did view him as a top 70, top 100 player in college football coming into last season. We did a value thing going into last year, and it was very clear. C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Travion Henderson were the three best players on this offense, most valuable players on this offense. We viewed him that way. We viewed him in the same light. If Bijan Robinson was clearly the best running back in college football, right after him, the names that were coming out of our mouths were Braylon Allen and Travion Henderson. Like, that's where he was 12 months ago, and then he spent the year hurt. So you have to add the context of who he was doing it against sometimes, we viewed him as one of the best running backs in the country a year ago, and then he got hurt 3 games into the season amid other things of, maybe his development maybe took a little bit of a left turn a little bit, but we viewed him as one of the best players in college football, and then he spent the year dealing with a foot injury. And now we're not even really sure if he's the best running back in the Big Ten or even top 5 right now.
Right, and that's why I think it remains to be seen whether just the injury held him back or were we wrong, and what percentage would you put in either of those two things?
Imagine if Travion Henderson was coming off 2 75-yard touchdown runs in the Michigan game.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Again, what does it look like? Donovan Edwards last year for Michigan averaged 7.1 yards per carry as the guy behind Blake Corum, who then had those runs in the Ohio State-Michigan game after Blake Corum was hurt. Travion Henderson averaged 5.3 yards per carry. And that's some of that's momentum. Donovan Edwards wasn't doing that early because Blake Corum was sucking up all the yards, and I think Blake Corum had 8 straight 100-yard games last year before he got hurt. But imagine if Travion Henderson had the kind of momentum that Donovan Edwards is carrying into this season, what we'd be saying. And part of it's just perception. It is. But we were really there. Like, what does it look like? And the fact that Evan Pryor has just not had a chance.
Yeah.
He really didn't play his first year while Trey went nuts, and then he got hurt in year 2. We have last spring, right? We were having a spring 2022. We were having a lot of discussions about Evan Pryor or Mayan Williams. Evan Pryor or Mayan Williams. Who do you think's the guy maybe can get in there with Trey? And then Evan Pryor got hurt, and it's like, well, that's over. And then we saw what Mayan Williams can do. Pedigree coming out of high school, Evan Pryor's is much higher than Mayan Williams. And we've seen Mayan Williams be a productive, and again, to your point, Nathan, different between productive and special. Mayan Williams has absolutely been productive, and asked the people at the Northwestern game who he ran over on the way to the end zone if he's special or not, right? In moments, he's like, well, I don't want to tackle that guy. Sir seems special to me right there. So, that's Evan Pryor. If we did a list of most forgotten, the lost guys on the roster, Evan Pryor, what you thought, and it's normal. You're a freshman, need a little more of an adjustment, and then you're hurt as a sophomore. Add him to the Marshawn Lattimore list, right? Yeah. What if he pops in year 3 in a room with 6 running backs? So, okay. So running backs under, because they're not Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. So they're under. But when we did it in July 2021, that's what we were thinking was possible. That's what we thought it might look like. Let's go to corner, Nathan. J.K. Johnson, Jordan Hancock, 247 composite ratings. J.K. Johnson, the number 3 cornerback in that class. Jordan Hancock, number 5. Denzel Burke was an athlete and is further down the list. Imagine, so Kool-Aid McKinstry at Alabama, who is, I don't know, if you were doing a list right now of the best returning cornerbacks in college football, I think he's in contention to be number 1. He's the number 1 cornerback in that class. And then the number 16 cornerback in that class is Kalen King at Penn State, who was awesome last year, was as good as Joey Porter Jr. practically last year. It is, I think, coming into year 3 now at Penn State. There's no questions about Kalen King. There's not a but with Kalen King. It's oh no, that guy looks like he's going to be a first-round pick. Imagine if J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock were Kool-Aid McKinstry and Kalen King right now, Nathan. That's what we were thinking. It was oh, they've had these issues at cornerback. Oh, this recruiting class solved it. Because they had Hancock and Johnson, and by the way, this Denzel Burke guy who's a dog, who's an athlete, who's flipping from receiver. They got him out of Arizona. Heartline loves that guy too. So Denzel Burke's done his thing. J.K. Johnson's gone, transferred to LSU. Jordan Hancock has been beset by injuries, Nathan. But when we were doing it, that's what we thought was possible. But as we sit here right now, we've talked a lot about the corners this spring, but compared to where we were, do we think the corners are under, over, or about what we thought they would be?
And so I'm looking at this again, this two deep. There's actually two other names of the four. So Hancock, we had Johnson listed as a starter and Hancock as a backup. Do you know who the other two names were?
Legend Cavazos and Ryan Watts?
Nah.
Ryan Watts was penciled in as a starter.
Jaheim Singletary.
Jaheim Singletary.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, this might be about the same in some ways because, and well, the other name that's absent here though is Denzel Burke. And we didn't know Denzel Burke was going to be maybe the best out of that whole group. And so I guess you just swap him in for Jalen Johnson, though, in some ways. He's starting third year out of that same class. And now you bring in Davis Nigmanosin. But I don't know, as much as we think he could be really good, we weren't thinking of him probably in the same with the same ceiling as a Jaheim Singletary. So I don't know. I would maybe call this about the same. It still seems like a room as we go into 2023. It seems like a position group that is going to take a favorable step towards being, at the worst, very stable and dependable. And I don't know if it'll be a group that is out there just making amazing plays all the time, but that's not what Ohio State has necessarily been lacking at that room. It's the standard's been even lower than that. It needs just somebody, it needs a group of like 3 or 4 guys to come in and be dependable every down guys. And so that actually makes me sound like we're maybe still undershooting it, but I think approximately that's what we were thinking. For like the total talent that we were thinking in 2021 for this group is still the talent that we think is there. Now it's just a matter of, are they healthy enough to put it together in a way that they weren't last year?
I think I agree with that. I think you plug in Denzel Burke for J.K. Johnson. I think J.K. Johnson was the top one to recruit. Well, Denzel Burke's now a 3-year starter who might end up being a first rounder next year, might not. We'll see. And then Jaheim Singletary probably had the higher ceiling between him and Davis and Igbinosin coming out of high school, but I think that's probably flipped now. And a lot of that is because Igbinosin played a lot of snaps last year, while James Singletary didn't really play that much for Georgia, and now he's in the transfer portal. And I think he's at Florida, I believe. I might have to somebody might need to fact check that for me, but it's pretty equal. The descriptions, if you take away the names of what we thought about this cornerback room, are the exact same descriptions. We're just applying it to other people.
I think they're still a little under. Like if you Arkansas for Jaheim Singletary, by the way. If Denzel Burke was a straight line, just like Denzel Burke had with the injury last year, wasn't himself the whole season. It does feel like he's trending the right way, had a really good spring. But I don't know. I would have thought that we would have been talking about like, with Hancock and Johnson, we're talking about like all-American quality cornerback play. I mean, maybe we're there with the possibility with Denzel, but I think we're a little under. Like, again, Jordan Hancock, if Jordan Hancock hits everything they said last year, coming out of August, what they thought he was going to be for them, how valuable he was going to be, okay, like get him back healthy to do that. I think they are high on the cornerback room coming out of spring. I think we agree with what they said. I don't think we're doubting them. So this is not, I just think, again, it's a step up from where the corners have been, but I don't know that we're expecting Marshawn Lattimore. But again, we weren't expecting Marshawn Lattimore when we got Marshawn Lattimore. So it's a very difficult thing. But if they had Kalen King and Kool-Aid McKinstry, we'd be like, oh, nobody can throw on them. Okay, good luck. You're not going to be able to get rid of the ball because Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau are going to be in your face. And if you do get rid of it, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Kalen King are going to intercept it. And like that's just not quite where we are. All right. So you guys I'm still a little under, like slightly.
Yeah,
realizing they could get there.
I think I was probably, the other thing that's happened is when we were talking in July of 2021, I think we thought the cornerback play was going to be better each of the past 2 years leading to this. So that is probably skewing my vision of this a little bit, that we would have thought that 2022, you would have already started to see the promise that would be there in 2023. and we saw none of the promise from any of those guys, really. In fact, we saw regression. And again, it was injury related, but you know what I'm saying? So I think that's probably affecting a little bit how I look at it, because we see the potential of such a contrast between last year and the year ahead.
See, I'm a little further than that. I thought 23 then would be the first time it'd be dominant. I thought in 22 because Singletary would be a true freshman in 22. So like, I mean, come on. We've seen it before, but you better be like, Strickland or something like that if you're going to be that good as a true freshman at cornerback. And then with JK and Jordan Hancock, because they weren't early enrollees, maybe you see flashes of it, but it would still be a little inconsistent. And then 23 would be the first time where you saw a group where it's like, that's going to be a dominant cornerback group. It just turns out that the cornerback group in 2022 didn't even show the flashes. They were just another version of what we've been seeing for the last couple of years. While this year, I still feel like this is the first time that we might see a dominant group. So I'm still on the same page there. It's just 22 was weird, but so have been the last 3 years here.
Then I think you'd have to be under, right?
No, I'm saying I still think what I thought about where the cornerback room would be in 2023, as far as this would be the first year where it'd be really, really quality play. I still think that now. That's why I'm the same.
Well, okay. You said dominant before, so that's why I'm. What's the difference between dominant?
I thought it'd be
really,
dominant
really quality play. I think that
when we did it in 21, I thought 23 would be the first dominant year. Here we are in 23. I still think this will be the first dominant year in some time.
Okay. Last couple guys to go through. We'll do that next on Buckeye Talk. Doug, Steve, and Nathan back. Again, great texter question that dove us into this. If you want to be a text subscriber, 614-350-3315 for a 2-week free trial. So in that class, they had 8 of the top 50 players in the 21 class, according to the 247 Sports Composite, and they had 14 of the top 100. They have lost Quinn Ewers. They have lost J.K. Johnson, but they've added Tuimoloau, who was the number 63 player in that class and went to Ole Miss, and now he's on the roster. So, okay, we'll throw that guy back in the mix. So, they were in on him, and I think people would have been excited if Ohio State had gotten him originally the first time around. So we can count him now. The other guys that we haven't talked about, the number, 19 player in that class was Donovan Jackson, Nathan, and I think he's on track, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just with offensive linemen, it's always a little bit harder to project if third year is going to be like the big smash year, or maybe that would be more likely to be the fourth year. But I mean, started all of last year and was solid and seems to be on schedule.
And it's hard, Steven. It's not like we said, well, great guard play, lock up the title. That's not usually how you talk about those things. Yeah. But when you think about settling, as much as we talked about tackle being an issue when we did it 2 years ago, we thought, okay, well, this guy's going to settle one of the guard spots, and he has. We expect Donovan Jackson as the number 19 overall recruit, now as a third-year guy, to be the best guy on this offensive line, and I think that's a success from, I think that maybe even is higher. There's no guarantee you're going to start in year 2. I think Donovan Jackson individually might even be a little bit ahead of what we would have said.
He forced them to give him a role as a true freshman, as a tackle eligible spot. And then as a second-year guy, he's a starter. I think the only question you maybe have about him is none of us are Bill Landis, none of us are offensive line aficionados, but he was the best guard in his class. Is he not going to be the best guard in the country?
Yeah.
Which is where that's a conversation Wyatt Davis was in at this point.
Boop, 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 boop. You know what that is? That's Nathan Baird back in the bus out of the garage. Mike Hall was the number 53 overall recruit in that class, Nathan. Is Mike Hall on track, a little behind what we thought, a little ahead of what we thought?
We had him as the starter on this 2 Deep, or I did, or whoever put this together. So I think he's right where we thought he would be.
Don't do that.
No, I think this is where we thought he'd be starting.
Don't come in here all small with it. Hey, we thought he'd be starting. No.
Listen, it's tough because he obviously showed potentially more than that. and some of us had
Yeah.
predicted even more than that for him. But he couldn't consistently do it for injury reasons. So I think that's why um, he's doing what he should be doing for this team. He could be doing something even more. I think it's just a matter of whether he can stay on the field at. And last year there was still just the whole weirdness of, was it all injury related? Was it because they liked Ty Hamilton better as an all around tackle on early down, whatever? So there's still some questions to be answered for him.
You want to go harder, Stephen, on behalf of Nathan?
Yeah, I didn't like that answer at all. Our expectations for him are a lot higher than they were in 2021 when we did this. It's one thing to be a star, to use Nathan's words. It's one thing to be productive. It's another thing to be special. This dude has a chance to be special, and none of us were thinking about him in a special way 2 years ago. So they're higher.
I think that's true, but especially because he had the two ends in the same class that were getting all the attention, and a defensive tackle even ranked in the 50s was kind of an afterthought.
But even then, it's like there was a point in 21 when we did like a vote, and our texters had Talik Williams as one of the 10 best players on his team. Like he has been the last to the party of everybody get excited about this kid. But it seems right now he'll stick in the room the longest, just based off what we've seen.
The number 87 recruit, according to 247 Sports, was Reed Carrico at linebacker. It hasn't really happened for Reed, but Steven, I almost feel like Tommy Eichenberg's in that spot. It's like, do you think you'll have like a game-changing linebacker? It's like, okay, well, like Reed Carrico can't get on the field because Steel Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg have locked those spots down. So again, this is not like a failing of Reed Carrico, but when we're doing it, it's like, we think the linebacker play might be pretty darn good, and I think maybe different people, but maybe we're on about the same spot.
Yeah, I think that the linebacker room, it's the same spot. It's just it was never applicable to him. It was going to be C.J. Hicks and Gabe Powers, or C.J. Hicks and Deshaun McCullough, I believe, at that point. So it's just Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers. But it's Reed Carrico's a top 100 recruit. I don't think we've ever necessarily viewed him with the same expectations that you view other top 100 recruits, because surrounding him have always been a lot of guys who were older than him or super, super talented guys that we were more excited about who were younger than him.
And then the last guy is Jaden Ballard, who is number 99, Stephen. And again, like we always just thought he was probably a year behind in the cycle behind Emeka and Marvin, just because of high school level of play and that kind of thing. We've talked about him a lot, but Jaden Ballard was not fundamental to our discussion then, and he still has a chance to be a good player, right?
At best, he's fourth if he ever passes Xavier Johnson this year. At worst, maybe he's sixth if Carnell Tatum keeps doing what he's doing. But you would expect him to at least be in the two deep, but they're pretty set at wide receiver.
So that's the group that kind of led us down that path with those third-year guys. I will say, Nathan, I do feel like maybe some of the fourth-year guys, the support is not as strong as maybe we thought it might be. Julian Fleming, partly because, guys maybe haven't reached what we thought, maybe have transferred, or because they're in the league. So you look at the 20 class, fourth-year guys. Julian Fleming, we already talked about him. He's going to help this team. Paris is gone. Jackson is gone. CJ is gone. G. Scott Jr., position change. It's taken some time. Cody Simon in the mix as a backup. Mookie Cooper transferred. Luke Whippler's in the NFL. Darian Henry Young transferred. Jacoby Cowan transfer. Court Williams, injuries, hasn't happened. Lathan Ransom will help this team. Ryan Watts transfer. Cam Martinez might help this team. Jack Miller transfer. Mitchell Melton injuries, he could help this team. Legend Cavazos transfer. Joe Royer still could help this team. And then we get into a bunch of the offensive linemen. Josh Fryer could still, obviously, we think he's a left tackle. Mayan Williams as a running back. It's not, in the end, by year 4, Nathan, it's not a ton of supplemental guys to the third-year stars. And I think, again, I don't know that we ever were counting on Paris Johnson or CJ Stroud or Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think Whippler, we probably would have guessed back then, would still be here. And that's a little bit of a hit, but it's not a huge group of, in year 4, are there a bunch of 4-year guys driving this bus? They're kind of not.
Yeah. And it is kind of a huge hit. I mean, to lose Whippler, because again, as we're, I think, about to talk, when you already have a potential weakness lingering out there at a position, and you take somebody else out of that same position group unexpectedly, that kind of throws the whole thing. It exasperates that problem. So that was one that we definitely, I think, of all the people on here, the one person we didn't expect to be that far ahead of schedule. As I'm looking back through this too deep, somebody that we thought, why that would still be here for not transfer reasons and isn't here, except
Is
Quinn
the
Ewers,
one
but he was a transfer.
is the
And
one
Dewan is the
this
other
is
one, yeah,
Yeah, because this is pre-fall camp where we saw Dewan was the starting
correct.
right tackle. So I think both of those are probably because Dewan Jones is probably a starter in 2023.
Yep,
We're thinking that this is like his
fully
second
hit.
year or maybe first year of the starter. So both of those guys are significant hits to what we're talking about here.
Nathan, what was your offensive line depth chart from back then?
Right tackle was Dewan Jones and Tegra Shabola. So half of that could still be right. Right guard, Enoch Vamahi, Ryan Jacoby. Enoch Vamahi is still around. Ryan Jacoby is not. Center, Luke Whippler and Jacob James, who could still be in the mix, but right now we think more likely as the backup behind Carson Hinsman. Left guard, Donovan Jackson and Ben Chrisman. Ben Chrisman now has moved on. But again, we were sort of projecting him only to be backup level at this point. And then left tackle, Zach Rice and Josh Fryer. So Josh Fryer could be in the mix. But again, that tells you that in 2021, we saw someone on the roster and thought, well, after 2 more years of development, we think that guy can probably be the backup.
And we were projecting a guy who popped earlier than anyone expected to be the starting right tackle, which is why now, because he's in the league, they're looking for 2 starting tackles instead of 1. And if you had Dewan Jones locked in, he doesn't start in 21, 22 is his first year as a starter, so he stays in 23 to be a second-year starter. Now you're only searching for 1 guy, but we talked about all these left tackle recruits. We talked about it then. We knew that was coming. That was our major caveat. That was like, we think they are a national championship team in every way except this. And here we are, and it's the same thing. 22 players that as second-year guys could supplement, Stephen. Like, again, that far out, we're not really thinking about it. But when you look at 22, we talk a lot about C.J. Hicks and Sonny Styles. Devin Brown could be the starting quarterback. We were very enthused about Kenyatta Jackson at defensive end in the spring. We know Gabe Powers is a little bit in the linebacker mix. Tegra Shabola, as Nathan said, is still in the battle at right tackle. Caden Curry is somebody we think can be in the mix at defensive end. Hero Canoe can be in the mix at defensive tackle. Carson Hinsman looks like the starting center as a second-year guy. Jair Brown is a guy that they have confidence in from the cornerback room. We saw what Dallin Hayden did last year as a true freshman. Kai Stokes is a safety people are still excited about. But, maybe beyond, and part of this is there's so many older guys. This is an old team in a lot of ways, Stephen, that there are going to be some guys who are blocked. And this is why it's a little bit like most of the guys that we're talking about now who are maybe not quite what they thought they would be, they have not been blocked. The reason we think that, these guys aren't quite is not because they haven't had the opportunity. A lot of these second-year guys now this year may not get the opportunity beyond Sonny Styles and Carson Hinsman. We're not sure who's going to play. But when we list those names, Stephen, that might be good. If these third-year guys hit, it's like, well, you get Kenyatta Jackson made a big play in this game. Hero Canoe made a big play in this game, right? Oh, man, like Sonny Styles had the game-saving pick. Like, that might be all you need from second-year guys when you have as much back as these guys have. But what do you think of the second-year supplemental guys in this conversation?
You can't even use Sonny Styles because he was a sophomore in high school at the time, not committed yet, and this was not on the table. So this is a CJ, and then like some of the other guys we're talking about. You're talking about CJ Hicks. You're talking about Deshaun McCullough, who ended up at Indiana and is now at Oklahoma. Jaheim Singletary, who ended up at Georgia and now at Arkansas. You're talking about Terrence Brooks, who ended up flipping to Texas. It's guys who weren't coming here yet. I do want to say this when it comes to Ohio State's roster building under Ryan Day so far. I think they've done a good job of not recruiting on top of each other to where you get a situation like the 2018 linebackers. Now, it comes to find out they also just weren't any good, but we spent a lot of time talking about how those linebackers were blocked because of there was just so much in front of them. This 2022 and 2021 class, they get a good job of pairing it to where now we're talking about The second-year guys that they need to step up are the top 100 recruits where they absolutely need guys. Kenyatta Jackson's a top 100 recruit where you need depth at the defensive line. Amari Oibor is the same way. C.J. Hicks being in the 2 deep as a second-year guy who's a top 100 5-star recruit. Meanwhile, you look at like wide receiver where it's like, I know we had some conversations this year about how this is a big spring, but it's not because it's a big spring for this season. It's because it's a big spring for next season. They did a really good job of like getting guys whose development tracks are just a little bit parallel to where you don't feel like you're blocking super talented guys, so you're losing guys to the portals every year, because you kind of came in knowing that a lot of these guys in this 2022 group, because you did such a great job recruiting in 21, we're probably not going to have significant, meaningful starting roles until their third year in the program, which takes us to 24, where you do need more of like a 21 level class where guys need to be ready to go in year 2.
So I think in the end, the conversation in the summer of 2021 was really a defensive end, cornerback, receiver, running back, quarterback conversation, because we're podcasters and we don't want to talk about defensive line and offensive line, right? Except that they matter the most. But like we were talking about like the possibilities. That's where the energy of that recruiting class really was lying. And I think we thought there was great possibility there. And by the recruiting rankings, and I think where everybody was thinking that was not unreasonable at the time. I think in the end, we are all below where we were in July 21 compared to where we are in May 23. And I think it's mainly 2 things. I think of those 5 rooms, corner, defensive end, receiver, running back, quarterback, I think maybe the only place we feel like it's been maximized is at receiver. And the other part is the hole that we were talking about back then that we thought could hold them back has not been filled. And sort of along the line, we were like, oh, well, they better do this. They better figure it out. They better have a first year or a second year offensive tackle. And actually, it got worse because Dewan popped and left. So like the problem that we saw, one problem, and that problem not only stayed, it spread because it went from 1 tackle to 2 tackles. Yes. So that's why, because we could have been like, oh, remember when we were so worried about tackle and then blank 5-star, they have a 5-star second year tackle ready to step in. They get the best tackle in the portal this last cycle, something, you patch the hole in the dam. They could have, and they didn't. So, and then by the way, as we said, doesn't mean any of these guys aren't good players. They are. They just, the first 2 years has not gone perfectly according to plan, probably anywhere, Nathan, except in the receiver room. So so what are we now? Are we 75% of where we were for what 2023 could be compared to where we were in the summer of 21? Are we 60%? Are we 80%? What do you think, Nathan?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because it's not as if it has knocked them off of being a national championship contender. It's just whether or not that's how lofty we were actually talking back then. Are they maybe still on a super team trajectory, greatest of all time? I would probably push back and say no. Do I think they can win a national championship this year? Yeah, I do. I don't see why not. Like, because there's still a lot of talent here, and there's still a lot of guys here who just because they have not kept on the unicorn trajectory doesn't mean they can't also be like a great white shark or something else that's like a more tangible, still like lethal thing. Unicorns aren't that lethal. I guess they can poke you with that horn or whatever.
They're not that lethal. They have a sharp but they have a sharp object on their forehead that can literally impale you.
But they don't go around just stabbing people for no reason.
I mean, they don't really go around doing anything because they don't exist. But you don't know that. We don't know that. What if unicorns, if they actually existed, were the most violent animals on the planet? We didn't know it.
And that's why they got killed off.
Mm.
Maybe that's what happened. But no, I still think that this is still a team that the ultimate like thing that this team can do is still within its reach. I think what we are see as being less likely, it'll just be a harder fight to do it. This is a pretty tough schedule. This is when you don't have maybe something you think is as magical at quarterback or as magical at defensive end, then it's just going to be a tougher challenge to get it done. But I still think we and a lot of other people across the country are still thinking Ohio State is one of the few teams that can win a national championship. But I think the thing that's I want to say this about the tackle thing. I mean, I think that was one of the first times we really spoke that into existence. Like July 7th or 2021 or whatever you said was like one of the first times that I don't know if anybody on the beat was really talking yet about there's like DEFCON, maybe not like DEFCON 1, but like DEFCON something about this tackle situation that's like looming out there. And they got to do something about it. And they already knew they had to do something about it, but you've had signing day 2021, signing day 2022, 2 regular portals, 2 spring portals, and they didn't get anything to help. I mean, Josh Simmons, we'll see what happens with that. But like certainly like big impact. Ohio State expectation standard level impact didn't happen at that one big thing. The one thing that was like lingering out there that we thought might be the branch that would trip them up. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to follow. Do they patch that together and make it so that that's not the thing that actually does trip them up, or is it something we're talking about in December?
I think the most impressive thing we've done over the past 6 months here since the 2022 season has ended we have found every creative way under the planet to remind people that we told you 2 years ago that there was going to be an offensive tackle problem. We do it every other week. We have a pod where it basically is like, see, we told you it was going to be an issue, and now it's an issue because we were definitely the bum on the street with the end is near sign. That has been us for 2 years here. Now it's come to fruition here. I think they can still go ahead, Nathan, before I finish my point.
I was going to say, and even more than that, like we didn't predict the right tackle hole being open necessarily, but we were saying early on, like DeJuan Jones was not like a projected starter really at any time in his career at that point, and that's who we were putting in that slot. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, we're better than everybody else. Buckeye talk. I think I think they can still do it. Now, greatest team of all time? Probably not. That's not happening. But I do think the idea of, we've had this conversation too, the idea of every year there's a super team, basically since 2019 with LSU, and then you had angry Bama, and then you had Georgia because of the defense. I don't know, maybe not last year. There wasn't much of a super team. Maybe Georgia was that, but I don't know if that's like an unbeatable, otherworldly team. If you had like a 12-team playoff with the greatest teams of all time, I don't know if you put 2022 Georgia in that the same way you put 21 Georgia in it. But maybe we get
right.
So right.
Even
But
21
even
Georgia
at 21,
that's tough to call that a super team.
Yeah, and even but you're basing so much on their defense the same way you put it so much on LSU's offense.
Super defense.
But the point of the matter is, super defense. We haven't seen a super team in 2 years now, and I still feel like, based off what we've seen all offseason and then how we've consistently talked about this team, that Ohio State, where things stand, might be the best case to have a super team when we get to the actual season. Now, whether they do it or not is a different conversation, but I do think they are best set up from a complete team standpoint to be the 2023 super team.
So 2 things. I do think we have talked about the offensive tackle thing so much. I think there are people who listen to us who are like, you know what? My family life is great. I've been working out. I'm in shape. I love my job. And the only thing wrong in my life is that I'm really worried about the Ohio State tackle situation. That I think we are actually we are dragging people down. And it's like, that ice cream cone tastes really good, but don't forget, the Ohio State tackles are below their typical standards. So we don't mean to be doing that to people, but you got to be aware of what you're aware of. The other thing is, I think you could listen to this and be like, oh, well, I thought we'd have a super team and we don't. I would take this message away instead. That DNA is still in there.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
what if in 2023, Ohio State gets the 2021 possibility, that version of Jordan Hancock, that version of Travion Henderson, that version of quarterback play, whether it's Quinn Ewers or Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, that version of Emeka Egbuka, that version of JT and Jack. It's in there. It's in there. It just hasn't come all the way to fruition yet, but it might just have taken a little bit longer to bloom. So it's not here right now. It's not. To have a super team discussion about Ohio State in May of 2023 would be silly. But let's check back into mid-October and see what we think, because that most of that has not gone away. J.K. Johnson's not here. Quinn Ewers isn't here. Okay. But Evan Pryor's been hurt, right? But most of that other stuff is in there. And we've already talked on numerous podcasts about how much depth they have. Matt Jones is still around. Cade Stover's still around. Tommy Eichenberg's still around, right? So there's not as much fourth-year support. There's actually more fifth and sixth-year support than you ever would have expected. There's some dudes who hung around for this, right? And you get a little Sonny Styles pop. You get a little Kenyatta Jackson here and there. You get a little, Denzel Burke is better than anyone thought. And all of a sudden, there's some DNA that lies within this team. So keep that in your head. And we didn't go back. If we had like a real producer, we would have had someone go back and cut out clips from what we said in July 7, 2021 and drop it in here. Instead, it's in your feed. If you want to go back and listen to that as a companion piece to this and be like, the guys have grown so much, they're so different. And like, nope, they're still yelling about the same stuff. But like, compare the conversation. So I don't want to stop doing this. And this makes me think we need to have a podcast about the 2025 team. What do we think? But I don't feel like there's not enough happening, right? I mean, to think like, would we sit here right now and be like, 2025 Ohio State, watch out. Well, I don't know. My guess is no, which also means it's a reminder of like how it was rolling, man, in July 2021. Like, it was on, baby. Like, we were not holding back at all. Doesn't mean they won't be great in 2025, but Steven, we're not quite. If Dylan Raiola was still here,
that's what I was going to say.
Now Jeremiah Smith's still here, but Jeremiah Smith keeps going to Georgia. I'm not going to. It's fine. It's fine, right?
It's okay, everybody.
Going to Georgia.
It's okay. That kid is he is literally just like doing normal recruiting process stuff. He's not in any danger of flipping. But the point I'm making to this, if Dylan Raiola were still committed, and we're talking about a situation where Ohio State currently would have the number 1 and number 2 players in the country committed to Ohio State, I think we'd be thinking about this a little bit differently. So because of that, I do want to kind of put a pin in something here, because Aaron Nolan is surging. He's having like a CJ Stroud level summer. It's just starting earlier than July. And with CJ, he ended up being the 3rd best quarterback in his class when he started surging. Air has started this. If Air goes to LA for the Elite 11 camp and he just like is wrecking everything, and he walks away and everybody's like, that kid's a 5-star recruit. That kid might be the number 1 quarterback in this class. I think we might start looking at things a little differently, because of the whole preference of why we did it the first time was because they had the best quarterback in the country who also might be generational talent. If Air continues on this pace where he's kicking butt on at these national showcases, and then he throws for like 50 touchdowns and 2 interceptions his senior year, which isn't crazy because he threw for like 45 and 2 this past year, we might start viewing some things differently. But the difference is this time around, we need to continue to see Ohio State's recruiting class shape out in the way that it had already kind of shaped out with that 2021 class by this point 2 years ago.
He's number 6 quarterback. He's not getting number 1. He's not getting past Dylan Raiola. He might get the number 2.
Probably not.
But maybe. He's number 6 right now. He's very highly rated. But that's a good thing to keep in mind. But I think it's worth doing. I kind of like this. It's like, let's lay it down. 2 years out. What's the perception? And maybe we'll have a podcast and say 2025, we think they'll be good. And then we'll get to 2025 and be like, they're a super team. Did we think they would be a super team? No, we didn't. Let's go back in time and look. So anyway, we'll add that to the list. For now, it is Michigan week. It's going to be Michigan week, right? That Monday through Friday, stories at cleveland.com/OSU about the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, what's changed at Ohio State, what's changed at Michigan. It's about the halfway point. So that's why we're doing this. We're just giving you a week of stories. We kind of already did it on the pod a couple weeks ago. We gave you 3 straight Michigan, Ohio State pods. So we're not going to hit it on the pod as much, but we really would like you to read what's being written at cleveland.com/OSU. Our rivalry reporter, Jimmy Watkins, had a good story about J.J. McCarthy as sort of a villain for Ohio State fans and a really important player for Michigan. Nathan wrote about what's changed at Ohio State. Jimmy wrote about what's changed at Michigan. We have a trash talk, sort of like what should Ohio State be doing story coming from Steven. We have a contrast in style story coming from Nathan. We're going to rank the best overall players, both teams combined. So a lot of Ohio State, Michigan content this week because we think it's that big of a deal. So we're like halfway in between, and we're trying to give that to you, something different. And then on Buckeye Talk, we'll just, keep rolling with the stuff. So for now, we appreciate you guys, as always, making us part of your week. For Nathan Baird and Stephen Means, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Buckeye Talk.